Episode 124,
What?
how to handle conflict.
That's interesting. We are in a world that revolves around conflict. Yet, for many of us, we'll spend all day, every day trying to avoid conflict at any cost. To
Yep.
include the sorry epidemic that we did. I don't know what
Mm,
show that was, remember? Where everybody like apologizes nonstop for stuff they're not even sorry for.
mm-hmm. Yeah. So first of all, Jerrod, how would you even define conflict? Like what is a conflict?
Opposing forces. That's it. Simple, right? It's opposing forces. It's just the opposite of whatever it is you're trying to do or achieve or believe or say or think. It's the opposite of it.
Mm. Do you have any recent examples for you of conflicts that have appeared or presented themselves in your life?
Dude, I think, yeah, I think every day we're faced with conflict, right? Like you and I come on and deliberate on what we're going to talk about today or scheduling guests, potentially conflict, right? Like what was it last week? We were talking about different guests, and you're like, well, I don't really like this or that or that. And I'm like, well, I kind of do. Technically, that's a
Mm.
conflict.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's how we resolve it, right? And so that's part of, and I will tell you, I'm working on this, and I've got much better as I've gotten older. Um, and that's one of my mantras I do, and part of my morning routine is that I will look for joy and happiness in all the people I meet and the obstacles that come in my way, which are potentially all conflicts, right? I meet somebody that is rude. I meet somebody that doesn't take customer service to heart, and I'm at the growth, right? Like, so I'm literally practicing on how I'm going to handle conflict every day. But I think that's the biggest thing for me that I've improved on is one, I'm open to it, right? When I was younger, like it was my way or no way for sure. And as we age, things change. But yeah, I think life is conflict. And
Mm,
somehow we've done this disservice to think that you can just avoid it at all cost.
Sensei Jerrod with the wise words.
You know what I mean? But think about it. Like, tell me part of your day that isn't a conflict. First thing in the morning, the alarm goes off. You got the conflict internally. Do I get up and get after my day or do I sleep in?
Hmm.
You know what I mean? You have internal conflicts and external conflicts. And I think people try to avoid both so much in their life. And that's where a lot of unhappiness comes from.
Mm. So why are conflicts so prevalent in our life, whether internal or external? And what does conflict in our lives achieve? Like what do we have to gain out of going through conflict?
That's interesting. What do you have to gain? I think everything. I think about like if you don't have any conflict, where's the challenge? Where's the growth? Like you and I, one of the things that makes this podcast work is we have conflicting ideas all the time. We have conflicting beliefs, we have conflicting experiences. But if I wasn't interested in learning from your perspective, I would just put myself in the circle with people that have done exactly what I do and think exactly like I do. Because I'm avoiding any conflict. I'm avoiding that exchange. But I think even if you look at the science of Earth was made through what? Volcanic eruptions and continents crashing together and mountains of conflict. Like literally our world is built on conflict. So then the true measure is not how do you avoid conflict, but how do you handle conflict. And I think that's where we can do a great job as societies getting better at handling our conflicts. You and I have talked about this before, and one of the things I was guilty of when I was younger, my truth was the truth, Whatever I thought about something was what I thought about, and whether it's based on my experience, my education, my learning, or just my ignorance. What I thought was right. And as you get older,
Yeah.
I think one of the joys about getting older is you realize, damn, I'm wrong a lot, and I don't know a whole lot,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, so just like you and I were talking off the air about, touchy subjects. Why don't people talk about race? Why don't we talk about racism? Why don't we talk about some of this stuff? Well, because we're afraid of what? The conflict that comes from it. Because we're still not really good at handling that. Or we're afraid of the conflict that arises that challenges our own beliefs.
Mm. So how do you think we can get better at that, at actually embracing conflict, knowing that as we go through and resolve conflicts, things will get better?
Well, I think one, you have to believe it, right? Like no conflict lasts forever. But I also think like look at your life, for example. Look at what you do. Okay, like you just moved to Florida. It would have been easy for you to sit in your house and stay on Zoom calls and social media and only connect back to the people in Colorado because you already knew what they thought of you. You already knew what to expect in those relationships. But you got to take risks. You go to a new gym, you go to a new neighborhood, you create new relationships, which have the potential to bring conflict, right? Because there's new ideas. You have to assimilate to a new society. It's like just like we talked about when you first moved there and you had your training incident with the triangle defense. That's conflict,
Mm-hmm.
right? But instead of you being pissed off that like, well, why would they scold me like that? I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. I'm never coming back. You actually reached down like, hey, here's what happened. Am I right or wrong? How do I handle this? Right? But it's conflict, but you didn't let your ego get in the way. You didn't let your emotions get in the way. You actually went to, okay, what do I do here? And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's how we get better. All conflict isn't a personal attack on you. And that's where I used to struggle when I was younger, is everything was personal.
Yeah.
So I think that's how you get better. It's like, okay, Ali, you think differently than me on this topic. Tell me why.
Yeah. There's a really good book that's called The Four Agreements. And I really can only remember one of them right now, but it's don't take things personally. And it's so profound because, especially when it's a conflict or a heated argument, it's hard to not take things perfectly. And I have a perfect story that applies directly to this that just for today and yesterday kind of came up for me. So I have a friend of mine who I admire and respect, and he's also a fellow business owner. And a few months ago, about 3 months ago, I was getting ready to launch my coaching business, and I had told him, I launched a few um, testimonial groups just to get feedback. And he's like, oh, dude, like, I really want to do one of your groups. Like, can you please? And I was like, oh, well, I'm launching, blah, blah. He still wanted to be in the beta groups. And I was like, all right, man, like, I'll do one more for you. Right. So I put a group together, and we do a beta group. And by the end, everyone agrees to do a testimonial. And for whatever reason, he was kind of just delaying the testimonial. I'd be like, hey, man, like, whenever you can get me that testimonial, that'd be great. A month goes by, and I'm like, all right, like, this is what we agreed to. If you could please get me that testimonial. 2 months go by. And then I'm starting to feel like he's a friend that I love, that I respect. And I'm starting to feel kind of like this, like, what the fuck? I'm taking it personally. And I'm like, this guy doesn't respect me. He doesn't respect my time, blah, blah, blah. And not really thinking of like, what could he possibly be going through, or like whatever, right? I'm just taking it personally. So um I had sent finally like one more like voice memo message, and was like, hey man, like, I know it's been several weeks. I know life happens. I know this and that. Like, I'd really appreciate that testimonial. And then I didn't hear anything from it. And just the other day, I saw that he shared something on social media, and just like seeing his face, I felt these emotions of like, fuck him. Like, I don't want to like this post. Like, I should probably unfollow him. Like, I don't even need people like this in my life. And I heard myself, and I was just like, whoa, like I'm taking this very personal, and I'm like kind of creating this conflict because of him not following through on something that he told me. So I share kind of how I'm feeling with Courtney, which was key. And I told her, I was like, like these emotions and thoughts and feelings came up for me when I saw him post this, and I don't want to have those feelings towards him, like he's my friend. I love this guy, but like they are, and as petty as I know it is, as much as I know it's from my lower self and my ego, these emotions are coming up, and I feel this conflict between it. Like I want to love him like I did, but I feel like this like small bit of resentment towards him. And she said what I didn't want to hear. And she was like, well, I think you should let him know. I think you should, talk to him about it. I was like, oh man, I don't want to do that shit, especially for us as men, who most of us men express from that masculine side. We're not very good at really like being like, well, this is how I'm feeling sometimes, right? And expressing our feelings. But I actually did that today. And I sent him a voice memo, and I was like, hey man, like I just want to let you know this is how I'm feeling. And I think it's because like I do love you and care about you and love you, want to have a good friendship. And even though this is so petty and it's just for like this little testimonial video thing, like I'm feeling this. And he called me like 5 minutes later and was like, man, I'm so sorry. Kind of shared some things that I had no idea what were going on with him. And even though they were pretty valid excuses, he's like, that's still not an excuse. And we were able to resolve that conflict. So the reason I'm sharing that is because you were just talking about how I reached out to you, right? When I had that triangle incident conflict. And for anyone who hasn't heard about that, the quick summary of that was I was at the new gym here in Florida where I'm training. It's not trials, and I stood up when someone kind of got a triangle on me, like kind of preparing to slam him, and kind of afterwards got scolded of like, hey, like that's not allowed here, and kind of rubbed me the wrong way. I took it personally, which you're not supposed to do according to the 4 agreements, and I reached out to Jerrod about it. But I think such a big thing is when you do having that awareness of this is bothering me. I feel that there's a conflict, and reaching out to, again, always come back to that circle of 5 people who know you, people that you know, that you trust, that you respect, to get that second opinion can always be a very productive way to help resolve conflict. Because even sometimes, even people like myself or like some of our listeners who may know it's not a healthy, productive practice to take things personally. We're human beings, so sometimes we still do. And it's important to reach out to your trusted circle in order to get just a little bit more insight, because sometimes you can't see when you're in the situation. You have that tunnel vision, and you need to take yourself out of the box to really see the whole situation.